Welcome to In Edina, a program about the people, places, and activities all in the city of Edina. I'm your host, Lillian McDonald. We bring you this broadcast from Edina's Museum in Arneson Park. And joining me to talk about the museum and lots of history in Edina is Frank Cardarell. Welcome.
Thank you.
We really appreciate you coming to the program. What a cool place this is. You're the president of the board of Edina's Historical Society, correct?
That's correct.
And that's a volunteer position.
Yes.
And you've earned that job because you have been here, a part of Edina's history for many, many years. When did that start? Was it great-grandfather?
Great-grandfather moved to Edina in 1874.
Wow.
And then my grandfather, we lived on the farm until I graduated from high school in 1951, the first graduating class.
And Edina didn't really become Edina until, was it 1888?
That's correct, 1888.
Wow. And most people know Edina for Southdale Mall, right?
Well, yes, and all the people that live here in the schools. We like to think that we were the first, I was one of the first graduating, in the first graduating class, and we like to think that we helped start the good reputation
all the
schools
good things
have.
going on here.
Yeah.
As noted here in this fabulous museum, the museum actually walks folks who come to visit through Edina's fabulous history all the way back to 1888. First farm country, right?
That's correct.
And then the urban world.
And the urban world.
And how did that come about?
I believe it started when the railroad or streetcar lines were added to the east side in France Avenue of Edina and the north side, 44th Street, all the way to Hopkins and out to Excelsior. And that was before the automobile. Then the building of the homes in the country club started because they were right on the railroad or streetcar lines.
And so after streetcars, then of course the cars came.
And then the automobiles came.
And that's when things really got moving in Edina.
Actually, the boom right after the Second World War, the housing boom for all the GIs, just exploded in the 50s and 60s.
And that's when the housing started to really grow.
That's right. And then, of course, the schools all grew, and we had the new school was constructed in 48 and first graduating class 1951. And after that, of course, a number of schools were built to handle all the students and children in
all the
Edina.
growth, of course, and the businesses right alongside all of that.
That's right. And, of course, all of the businesses just boomed right along with it. The drugstores and supermarkets and Southdale, of course, which exploded in 55, 56.
Wow, that's incredible. And pieces of that history is all on display right here in this fabulous Edina's Museum here, right?
That's correct. We have the display up that's open Thursdays from 9 to 2 and Saturdays 10 to noon. And you're welcome by appointment any day when I will come and open for you any day. If you call me, I'll have an appointment and we can come and I'll show you the museum.
And you have a lot to share. Where do you get all the artifacts in this museum?
Well, they're given to us basically by former residents and families that want them to be kept and want them to be shown and displayed. Many of them, the pictures, the country club, the old farm equipment, and the old schools. Obviously, it's all here for you to enjoy and look at.
Street signs and pieces of schools and baby carriages and things of the past. Why is it so important to remember Edina's past, Edina's history?
Well, it's always important to remember history. History is what we all live by, whether you realize it's immediate history or history of 100 years ago or 200 when our country started. The history that Edina formed with the country club and the nice homes, actually the streetcar lines where it was easy to get places downtown. We're only 10 miles from downtown Minneapolis. Yeah. The history is so important as to really how we have evolved as a one top-notch community in the country.
And Frank, you tell the story quite well, and you're a member of an 11-member board here that keeps this museum going on behalf of Edina's Historical Society, right?
That's correct.
And you're always looking for new board members, I know.
Always. We're getting older.
The pay is high.
The pay is
it's all in volunteer time, right?
Volunteer time is correct.
In addition to the museum, what else does the Historical Society take care of here for the city?
Well, the museum plus the old school, the old Cahill School, which when I was a kid was in operation, And we used to hold church meetings there and community meetings in the old Cahill School, and that we, as a historical society, still operate. And it's run, boy, about 150 days out of the year for students to come and enjoy what it was like in the old one-room school.
That's awesome. And then also the Grange, right?
And the Grange Hall, which was actual Patrons of Husbandry, which was a farmers' organization, because Edina was back 100 years ago, was almost all farms. And it was urbanizing, but it was very slow too, because it was still, there was no automobiles, just the streetcar lines.
Wow, and you can get some snapshots and see it all right here in Edina's fabulous museum. Frank Cardarell, thank you so much for your board service as president of Edina's Historical Society. And thanks so much for joining us on In Edina. I'll bet parts of this program will end up in the museum here, right?
I would probably imagine it will.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
With all the activities in the city of Edina, there's a lot to write about, and columnist Joe Sullivan is here to join us. You are a writer for Edina's magazine, About Town. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
We really
Good to be
appreciate
here.
it. You've been writing for quite a long time for the magazine.
Yeah, it's been the past 10 years.
How did you get into that?
Well, it was really that I worked in the advertising agency. I'm going to say agency, but the advertising business, both on the client side and the agency side, for a lot of years, and for a lot of good companies, and worked with some good writers.
So you had an opportunity to kind of dabble in it, but
yeah,
as a
around
retired
the
account
edges.
executive for
Yeah.
advertising, you thought it'd be nice to be your very own columnist.
Well, it's something I'd always wanted to do and never had the time to do. And now I have the time.
That's wonderful. A lot of folks compliment your stories. There have been surveys out that asking Edina residents what do they think about town, and your column is pretty popular, and it's because of the people you write about.
Well, I'm glad to get it. I hear from some of them once in a while, and I think that's fairly unusual. And they so far have all been complimentary.
Yeah, that's nice. Where do you get your ideas as a columnist?
Well, they come from all over the place. Some people call in and say, "Why don't you do an article on this?" Or a lot of them I get here right at the Historical Society where we're shooting this. And in fact, the one that I'm about to start to work on came from the history of Burma shave.
Burma shave.
And the
Cool.
Burma shave signs. Do you remember that?
I do remember that.
No, you shouldn't admit
Well,
that.
I remember that in a museum. You're right.
But it's hard to know where they will come from.
But all of your articles and columns actually come from around Edina, and you also draw on your experience, the people from the history of Edina that
Yes.
you knew back when.
Oh yes, going back to high school. I went to high school with some kids from Edina because Edina had not built their first high school yet. And so the kids went to different high schools, Southwest, St. Louis Park, West High School. And I went to Southwest with the first graduating class of Edina High School.
And through the years, you've kept in touch with those,
Yes, more or less,
those
yes.
student friends,
That's
and
right.
they've invited you into their lives.
Right.
And now they become stories in your columns.
They do in many cases, and I can refer to their houses because we used to have a lot of parties in the Edina houses. They were great to have parties in.
Sure. What's your favorite story? Favorite column ever written?
I think it was one about my family and our fallout shelter. We built a fallout shelter back in the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Sure, yeah.
And people said, are you crazy? But we were concerned about it. My in-laws were concerned about it. And my father-in-law agreed to pay for it. So I said, well,
why not?
Go ahead,
Yeah.
And,
But that's a good example of how you've captured a snapshot in history that we all can relate to.
Yeah.
And it shows up in your column, and that's what people appreciate.
Well,
they remember that time.
It seems to be a good combination, and it's been very fruitful for me.
It sounds like you're definitely fulfilling your dream to be a writer, and a good one at that,
been
judging from the readership that you have. And I thank you as a reporter and host of Edina for being a part of telling people's stories. That's important.
Thank you.
And thanks
Thank
for
you very
joining
much.
us today.
All right, it's my pleasure.
If you're a police officer, you see a lot of the history of Edina, and capturing every moment is Kevin Raffadal, who's an officer with Edina's Police Department. Welcome. We appreciate you joining us on In Edina.
Thank you.
Now, you're kind of dubbed the police department's official historian, right?
I guess so, yeah.
And you got into this a few years ago because you got interested in collecting the stories of police officers and the work they've done here in Edina.
More or less, yes.
Yeah. So tell me about the guy who was going to share the scrapbooks, his stories with you.
There was an old detective here named Wally Johnson, and I had talked to Wally on the phone, and he was going to bring in some scrapbooks and tell me some old stories. And before he had a chance to meet with me, he passed away, and I never had a chance to meet with him. And so I realized the urgency of getting all these old stories and documenting them, recording them, and capturing them before all these retirees and our old alumni are gone.
Why is it important, do you think?
Because they hold the stories, they hold the secrets, they hold the memories of kind of behind that badge, the stories of the inner workings of the department, of the community, of some of the events that have gone on over the years.
And not just of the department, but of this community from the eyes of a police officer, too.
Exactly.
So you've talked to some very interesting characters, and you're recording this information through the years in a variety of different ways, sometimes on paper, sometimes by audio cassette, and now video as well. What kinds of questions are you asking them?
You know, it starts off with just some basic stuff about, the structure of the department, and then we kind of get a little more in depth into some memorable cases, some things that they're proud of, things that when we start to dive deeper into the cases, and some might be just as they call them, old stick-ups, some burglaries, and then they might be more unique to them, maybe cases that they worked. It might not be a real major case in the department, or it might have been a very major case. It might have been an old homicide, it might have been an old kidnapping case, and if it's a detective or an officer that maybe was the first on the scene, they hold a lot of details that you can't find necessarily in the reports. Mm-hmm. And just interviewing them and what they remember. And each officer that worked here for their career seems to have those 3 or 4 cases that they can tell you every detail about. And so that's what I've been going back and trying to capture those memories and archiving these stories.
From just a snapshot, favorite story you've heard on the street from police?
I don't know if there's actually one particular story. It's just more of the, sometimes they're very sad stories. Sometimes they're successful stories. Sometimes it's about life-saving. And so it's just really neat to see the in-depth part of it. And and just some things haven't changed over time, and yet other things have. And sometimes it's just old-fashioned police work. Sometimes that cop intuition when they see a car and realize there's just something not right here. And on a recent interview, that was the case where he could just tell there just wasn't something going on right in this car, and that happens in the 40s. And
yeah, it doesn't matter how old you are. Some of the tricks of the trade, I guess, or the gut instinct is still there. We haven't had many major crimes, thankfully, here in Edina. Only 13 or so homicides.
Correct.
Over history.
Yes, yeah, over about an 80-year period where the police department was formed. We started in 1930, and so we haven't had very many homicides. We don't have a lot of street crime. In the 70s, we had a lot of burglaries. Those have tapered off over the years. So not a lot of street crime, but we have had some very notorious cases over the years. We've had some very high-profile home invasions, a couple of them, and very noteworthy cases, but not a lot of street crime compared to other communities our size in the metro area.
Mm-hmm. And it's important to document all of that to preserve the history of the police work and the department as a whole, as it has changed over time. Some things are the same, but really many things change as well, and it's good to know that. We learn from it, right?
Exactly. And the men and women are the people that really hold those answers, and that's why they've been real instrumental in
What do
that.
you plan to do with all the interviews?
Right now, it's just mainly been archiving them, and as time has gone on, some of our old World War II veterans, some of those stories that we captured early on in the early cassettes, as they left, and then the Edina Historical Society has transcribed them, I realized that there were stories that they told us that I was starting to forget. And once we saw them on paper, it was just even more important to get them documented. So we're just mainly capturing them right now.
Capture now and maybe a book later. Who knows?
A book, video, who knows?
Who knows? Well, Officer Raffettle, thank you very much for your service and for your work as a historian for Edina's Police Department.
Welcome.
Preserving landmarks in Edina is important business, and the Heritage Preservation Board takes care of that for the City of Edina and all the residents. And joining us to talk about their work on this is City of Edina's Associate City Planner, Joyce Repia, and the Chair of the Heritage Preservation Board, Joel Stegner. Thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
We appreciate it. So the Heritage Preservation Board, by itself, you don't necessarily know exactly what you do, but your research and your work advises the City Council on the buildings and neighborhoods and areas to preserve here, correct?
That's
exactly. Right. So your board meets monthly and you carry this information back to city officials, correct?
Correct. I'm the staff liaison, so I'm the one that gathers information for the board, prepares for their meetings, provides any research that they may need, and I help facilitate their meetings.
And that's an important function as a part of the city planning department because, again, things change.
Correct.
Times change, land changes, buildings change, right?
Right, and heritage preservation does fall within our zoning ordinance.
And so you also are responsible for helping to fund the work that the Preservation Board takes care of, correct?
Well, fortunately, the City of Edina is a certified local government, which means we qualify for federal funding. So we can apply for legacy grants and other federal funding that's out there to help facilitate funding some of our projects.
How do you determine what is worth preserving in a city? It seems like everything is worth preserving, but you can't save everything, right?
It's the term of significance, architecturally significant, culturally significant, historically significant, well known in the community, a landmark.
And we have a lot of landmarks in the city of Edina. What qualifies as a landmark? Is it a passage of time?
Well, landmarks sometimes are evident from day one, but for our business, we look at 50 years into the past,
Okay.
which today is 1961. For some of us, that doesn't seem that long ago,
No.
but that's the standard. And that, of course, every year the number changes.
Sure.
So 10 or 15 years ago, the number was like in the mid-40s. So the focus was on the pre-World War II period, and that's gradually shifted, and now is really looking at the 50s, which is when Edina had, I think, most of its development.
Yeah, quite a bit. Now you're looking at three key areas now as a board to help advise the city council and plans for the city for preservation. What are the areas?
Well, one thing that people are aware of, I guess, probably more than the rest, is Southfield Shopping Center, which was the first, enclosed mall in the United States. It's very well known nationally and internationally, and it's in our backyard. So we'd like to preserve it. Of course, it's a commercial business, so that's somewhat difficult because it's evolved over time.
Right.
But
And what part of the mall do you preserve?
well, as you go into the mall, into this, the garden court, there are elements of the original design still visible. So our idea is not to try to, undo what's been done, but to preserve those elements and give people a sense of what it might have been like when it was built.
The country club area is another spot. It's not always about a building. It might actually be about a beautiful historic area.
Well, heritage preservation is, it tends to focus on individual structures, but Country Club is a historic district, which means that we look at all the housing in the neighborhood. So it's kind of the introduction of the neighborhood concept in terms of heritage preservation. And most of it was built before World War II. It was done by a developer with standards. It was planned, and all the plan of treatment or the description of how it was supposed to be done is we use in terms of looking at projects. We haven't been around forever, so after the initial construction phase, some of the houses were torn down.
Sure.
They were, people wanted something new. So we do have some replacement houses in the neighborhood, some of which work within the context of the neighborhood, some which maybe are small, 50s style. As you're driving down a street, you will see them, they'll stand out. So, and then, of course, there's wear and tear in houses. There's the question of replacing the housing stock. So one of the things that we do is that when there's a significant change to a house in the neighborhood, particularly if one's proposed to be torn down and rebuilt.
Got to make sure it fits into the preservation process. Right?
Correct.
Yeah. Now, 50th and France is yet another area, again, very historic. I love going through that area.
And the element of that we've, I guess, preserved is the Edina Theater side.
Of course.
It's a dynamic area. Many of the things that people remember, I think you come to the Historical Society and see exhibits on, but much of that is gone, and we can't do anything about that. But
So
we do preserve what we can.
When you look at these various projects, then you take that information, the idea of preserving Edina's history, and you help the City Council and others make decisions going forward into the future. But how do you possibly look forward when you're so focused on preserving history?
Well, there is a heritage preservation element within the city's comprehensive plan that was done in 2008.
Okay.
And this projects out into the year 2030. So we are looking ahead. We do have a list of priorities of what we're looking at, but we are so open to things that people may bring before the board that say, hey, have you thought about this? So they're very open for ideas that may come from within the community
So
as
you
well.
are working with the community
Correct.
on the structures as well as city officials and elected officials and leaders to preserve a great community.
Right.
And that takes work and it takes good thought. And I thank you both
Wow.
for serving on the Heritage Preservation Board
It's been a pleasure.
and for joining us on Edina.
Thank you.
We want to know what you think. Every month on Edina, we take our microphone out to the streets and ask a question. This month's question, when you think of Edina's history, what comes to your mind? When you think of the city of Edina, historically, what comes to your mind?
When Southdale was first built.
Well, Edina, isn't that the home of the cake eaters?
When you think about the history of Edina, what kinds of things come to your mind?
This mall during Christmas time. It's the nicest mall in Minnesota.
Southdale, the birdcage. You're too young. There was a birdcage.
There was a birdcage here.
Yes.
Well, I guess you can say the buildup of the area, the different buildings around the mall and stuff.
I grew up with the birdcage. It was right there. It's gone.
Hockey.
Hockey?
Yes.
Tell me more.
Oh, they're a good high school hockey team.
I think of the one-room schoolhouse that we visited. Lots of things with academics have always been, I know Edina's always been highly regarded as far as that goes.
That school building across from Perkins.
Cahill School.
Early on, Edina people went to school there, and their classrooms were very different, and ideas about education were very different, but they did care about education as they do today.
Edina is a beautiful town, first, and it has a beautiful mall. This mall, Southdale Mall, is a really, I think it's the oldest mall of the America, and it's a beautiful mall.
Thanks for sharing your memories with us on In Edina. It's fun to hear what you think. We'd like to thank all of our guests for joining us, and especially Edina's Historical Society for letting us bring you this broadcast from Edina's beautiful museum. Stop by and check it out sometime. Thanks to all of you for watching. Until next time, I'm your host, Lillian McDonald. You've been watching In Edina. Have a great day.